So without further ado, we will commence, and because I was told over there, George is going to start off because he's the oldest, and he said everything stops with him, and the other younger one said I had to start with George because there's a chance he could go to sleep halfway through our session, but we won't go there, George. That's a bit rude, I said. So George, take it away. Tell us about yourself, age description of your cows, that is, not yourself, and where you come from, etc., etc. They'll switch it on for you.
Okay, as Richard said, I'm George Moss. It's my privilege to actually be farming with my wife Sharon. We own 2 small dairy farms in the South Waikato, just outside of Tokoroa, plus a 40-hectare support unit. The dairy farms are about 70 hectares each, and they run about 180 cows across each of them. One is pretty close to a System 1 farm, the other one is a System 2 farm. We've been in the dairy industry now for close on, how long have I been married? 33, 34, 4 years. And so we did 10 years share milking, 1 year 50-50 at Huntly, 9 years at Puketurua. We did things a little bit backwards. We started off with 290 cows, finished up with 240, and purchased our first farm of 57 hectares. And since then we have grown it. We're in a position where we're not growing our land holdings anymore, but looking to grow our business in other ways and looking about how do we bring the next generation in. So it's my privilege to sit up here with 3 of the next generation, and that's what inspires me.
Carlos?
Yeah, before I start, I want to send my regards on behalf of my wife. She wanted to be here, but she's the one who's holding a little baby, cute little baby there, so she's sending her regards to everybody. I've been farming for the last 17 years, I think, 17, 18 years here in New Zealand. So I came from a non-farming background, and so I started with as a relief milker, and progressed right through 50-50 share milking. So we are in Ngakuru in Rotorua. So next year we'll be milking 380 cows, me and my wife and a full-time staff. We've pretty much worked full-time for the last 10 years. The last 4 years being 50-50, and I've seen the changes in dairy farming all those years. So
Rachael?
Yeah, g'day. I'm Rachael Foy. I've been dairy farming for 4 seasons. Before that I did a BAg at Lincoln. I'm currently at the end of my 3rd season on the same farm, where I'm managing 450 to 500 cows, and looking forward to next season where I'm moving to contract milking 400 cows.
Sam?
Hello everyone. My name's Sam Howard. I'm first season this season 50-50 share milking at Shannon in Manawatu. Prior to that, I've been in Taranaki for about 3.5 years, farming there, managing in lower order share milking. Before that, I had a bit of a stint in Australia, farming for a year, and prior to that, in my past life, I worked for DairyNZ as an economist, based here in Hamilton. So it's great to catch up with a lot of old faces today, and thanks for the opportunity to speak.
First question to you all, and we'll start down the other end with George again. Some of you have been in dairying for a wee while. What attracted you to dairying, and tell us about some of the learnings on the way through.
Okay, what attracted us to dairying? Well, I'll go right back to the beginning. I had a very wise father. He had 4 years education, started school at 8, finished at 12. And we had a sheep and beef farm in Raglan, some hard country there. And he said way back then that he said, look, the sheep and beef industry is going nowhere, and if you boys want to farm, you need to get out and get into an industry with structure. So he said he would build the cow shed, do the conversion if the boys were prepared to milk cows. So that was where it actually started. That was the change. And so the power of industry structure has stuck with me forever. And if you only look at where the wool industry has gone, I was selling wool then for $4 and back in 81, and it's now at $2.70. So that's what lack of structure does for you. And the beef industry has only really just turned the corner in the last half decade. So that was the beginning, but the key learnings that I had, and probably the best learnings that really set my wife and ourselves up for the future, we did come through share milking through the Rogernomics. So we purchased cows at $600. We had interest rates because in those days everything was regulated. The industry was regulated. Up to then it couldn't go down by more than 5% a year. So think about those days where your milk price can't drop by more than 5%. Interest rates were fixed. The first loan was at 7.5. You had to get a second loan, so we had a second loan, which was a bit higher than that, and the third loan had to be a commercial loan through a retail bank. And when that whole deregulation came, our cows went from $600 to $200. Interest rates peaked out at 23%, so you go back really, really quickly in that environment. And milk price went from $4 a kilo milk fat to $2.20. So our little equity that we had was absolutely written off there and then. And the one thing that we've always believed is that you must control your own destiny. You cannot leave your destiny in the hands of the others. So what we did then, and I like to think of it as one of probably the first debt restructurings, we went to those bank managers and said, we are not going to farm a whole season and come out $80,000 worse at the end of it. And they said, oh, well, you know, go on, we'll see what happens and see how it plays out. And I said, no, that's not a happening thing. We're going to make a decision now. So the first banker said, well, if you can get the other one on side, we'll do something. So that was exactly what we did. We went to the banks and we got them all on side and we got a debt restructuring package in place. Then we actually used the opportunity out of that. How did I get him on side? I told the third banker basically if they sold us up, which he suggested that he was an unsecured creditor and he wouldn't get his money back. So negotiate from a position of strength. And the other reason that was quite clear in our mind, at that point we didn't owe any money to any of the local creditors. So all the local small businesses around town were all paid up. So all the risk actually sat with the banks if we actually folded. So we used that opportunity to restructure the business. We actually used the opportunity to restructure the herd. So we sold all our October calving cows to others, and we were buying cows on the drop for the same money, $200, brought our costs down. But what we did, we were started at that point manually cash flowing out 2 years. So always from that day on, we've always cash flowed our business 2 years out. We will leverage what those cash flows look out. And so although it wasn't advice, it was the most powerful lesson I've learned. And when I work with people and work with young people, the successful ones always have cash flows, never accept losses, and the ones that are, if you like, less successful do not know financially where it was. So the 87s were a powerful learning for us, Richard.
George, how would you like to do it in today's climate?
You get to farm ownership and all those sort of things you're asking, Richard?
Yeah.
Look, I think there's some wonderful opportunities now for the next generation, and it truly does inspire me to be sitting up here with these three people. But the models that we've used as the past, and as passionate as I am about the models of the past, 50-50 share milking coming up, I personally don't believe that the models are the future. So the challenge on my generation, which is going blind and deaf, and I've left my glasses and hearing aids behind, is how do we actually bring them in? How do we structure our businesses now with such the appropriate debt structure so that we can bring Carlos in and Rachael in and Sam in, because they've got the new energy, they've got new thinking, new insights. So I think it's about some form of equity partnership type arrangement, might be through lease arrangements, which allows us a dignified exit so I can keep up with my bad habits, and gives them the opportunity. And interestingly, this is why we have kept our two small farms side by side as small farms, because they are highly profitable, and the data's on Dairy Base if anybody wants to actually check that. Can provide very good standards of living for a farming family that want that.
Carlos, tell us about your journey and what attracted you, A, to New Zealand, and B, dairying.
Well, dairying was pretty much accident for me. I'm not meant to be farming. In fact, I had a bit of a thing about joining the military or the police, and so back in the 2001 New Zealand days in Mangakino, the only job really is dairy farming, and so I went farming because that was the easiest job to get into, and the whole reason was to get my first money to buy my first car, which is a $500 one to get to town and get some job and study there. But when I started farming, we pretty much, I guess, fell in love with it, and just talking to the right people, and I just happened to worked with a awesome boss back in those days, and told me the story about how you're gonna progress if you do this and do that, and yeah. So I mean, I just listened to all his advices and go from there, and never really look back. And farming is, you know, I mean, I've experienced it firsthand. You know, when you're starting out, it's always difficult to get yourself established and save that first money. When we bought our first 30 cows in 2009, that was the highlight of our career, and never really looked back and leased them for a year. And yeah, once you get those first hand on cows, yeah, there's a lot of sacrifices involved as you go along, and as long as you can resist on not buying any new cars and that sort of thing, I think you'll do just fine. And then, like I said, once you get that first set of cows, they sort of multiply from there. And once you get used to the lifestyle of my accountant used to tell me that you should live miserable if you want to get ahead, and that's what we done, is sort of just you know, just keep ticking along and save money and put everything into buying cows, and that's pretty much what propelled us to where we are.
If you had your time again, going through the same process, any learnings?
Yeah, I probably would save a little bit more money in my early years of farming. Obviously, as a young guy as well, you know, you tend to make few mistakes here and there, and I think that's probably the beauty of being human. You make mistakes and you learn from it, and you either you know, spend money on this or that. And so if I go back as a 22-year-old, probably spend more money on cows and less on alcohol, I guess. But no, I'll do it all over again, and yeah, and yeah, I guess having the right people, you know, you associate yourself with right people, and they definitely help you think of the bigger picture and do well. Yeah.
Rachel, those 3 years at Lincoln must have been entertaining. What drew you into dairying after those 3 good years?
Yeah, I'll go back to sort of before Lincoln. So I grew up on sort of 24 hectare lifestyle block, I suppose, that mum and dad were running with dairy grazing or beef at times. And then I learnt to milk and sort of had my first introduction to dairying and sort of real farming, I suppose. When I was about 12, I helped out on weekends and during holidays on a local dairy farm, and sort of continued doing that right through high school. And I suppose the initial attraction to farming and to dairy in particular was being able to work with animals and being outdoors and being part of a sector that contributes quite significantly to New Zealand's export earnings. And from there, you went to Lincoln. But I think the decision to make a career out of it, obviously a lot of people that go to uni and do ag, go off farm and do other things, was sort of down to the ability to grow my career and grow my equity, and the ability to go into business for yourself, which I'll be doing next season. I found dairy to be an incredibly supportive industry. Everyone's willing to sort of share their information. We're not trying to compete against one another. And yeah, I really enjoy the ability to be able to manage a diverse range of things, from animals, pasture, feeding, staff and finance.
You've been in the pathway only a few years. Would you change anything?
No, probably not. I've been really fortunate to. I've only had two bosses in that time, but yeah, they've both been really good. Been really lucky in that respect, I think, and they'll continue to be mentors for me going forward.
Now, Sam, you moved from one drought zone to another. What attracted you to dairying for a starter?
I'm not sure that Taranaki's a drought zone. Not
Was this year?
Well, not where I was anyway. So probably the big thing that attracted me to be dairy farming, sort of in an on-farm position, is just the ability to, you know, every day go outside and work with animals and work with the land and be able to drive improvements in what you're doing and see the results of those improvements. What you're doing, what you do today directly impacts on what you're doing tomorrow. And just being able to look back and say, over the last few months, these are the things that I've achieved. These are the things that I've ticked off my to-do list. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. So that was a big driver. I grew up my family was involved in sheep and beef farming, and so I didn't grow up in the dairy sector as such, but I was lucky to get a DairyNZ scholarship for my time at Massey. And so that was a big eye-opener for me in terms of just being able to see the opportunities within the industry, meet a lot of the people that are involved, and just see the levels of knowledge that are out there that are, and as Rachael has said, just that people are willing to share with each other, That's a big thing, that we're all willing to come together in a room like this and talk and learn from each other. And just going to a discussion group, for example, gives you plenty of examples of that. The other kind of thing, I suppose, is from a relatively young age, you're able to run a business and take on a lot of responsibility. So I guess you're looking for a bit of risk-reward profile for that. Got to make sure that's weighted in the right way, but at the same time, I do get a lot of satisfaction out of that as well. And as I said before, just knowing that what you do today impacts on directly on you tomorrow. And also just that there's such a range of areas involved in dairy farming where it's sort of basically just constant learning. As everyone in this room knows, from one day to the next, you're always learning something new and discovering a new problem and something you've got to fix, often which comes at the wrong time. But at the same time, you're learning every day. And I think, just in terms of job satisfaction, that's a huge thing. You certainly know that you're alive anyway.
Next question is, think about your own situations. What do you believe are some of the biggest challenges you face? George, all yours.
Thank you. Look, the biggest challenge that we face is the challenge that we've talked about today, which is fundamentally, how do you grow and shrink at the same time? So how do we actually grow our businesses? How do we actually get the next generation in? How do we actually, if we want, to exit with the sort of lifestyles that we want, yet at the same time actually reduce our footprint and reduce our impact on the environment and those sorts of things, and now we're bringing gas into it. So I see that as the biggest challenge today, and the subset of that is how, as farmers, do we actually mentally handle that change, because change and uncertainty definitely does rattle the brain. And I think there's two parts of it, and maybe we're sort of very fortunate, and we've always been passionate about, trying to control the uncontrollable. So the sort of things that we're trying to do to get our minds around this is to look, one, where do we actually want to be, which is obviously at the right end of the spectrum. What does that sort of sweet spot look like, where we've got the sort of profit that's actually required? But also, if this thing comes in at us, particularly greenhouse gases at a certain level and nitrogen, what is it going to do to our business, and how do we need to dress that business up? So we do use extensively overseer, we do use quite extensively Farm Max, we do look out, what we want our lifestyle to be like in 10 years' time. And I have to say, I find this space both very, very exciting and both very, very scary at the same time, because the scary side of it is we mightn't be able to manage that as a farming family. The exciting part is, if you look at the values, and I think it was in Steve Allen's address, of where we're moving from a purely profit motive to the values that we can deliver to humanity, to society, nutrition, food, egalitarian society, all those sorts of things. That is a space that I think is really exciting, and a space that we actually need to be. So I see that as the biggest challenge. And I think in managing the headspace, each one of us has a choice as individuals. You can either choose to be victimised by change and have the victim's mentality, which is one of always being negativity. And if you're arguing against it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't try to always maintain sure there's balance in there, or you can say, this is happening, this is real, how do I actually work within it, how do I actually manage that, what changes do I need to make to my business going forward? And there's one key assumption in there, is where your business is at in terms of debt, profit, and where it actually needs to be, and you start making those changes around that. So I'm not sure that was what you actually asked, Richard, but that's what they got.
That's what you gave us. Carlos, for you, in your situation, the critical challenge and how you're responding?
I think the word of the day is changes in it. We get a lot of rules and regulations that we have to face, and we will have to face in the next few years and in the future. And we do have a few things, rules and regulation in place now that didn't exist 15 years ago, and yet we're still farming. And so I think it's all for us to adapt to these changes. And sometimes us dairy farmers, we tend to live in a little square box and be happy with it. But for us to move ahead and get ahead, we need to make sure that we do things different to make sure that the future generations will have a chance to do what we're doing now. I think that'll be the way to do it, is to adapt to changes and live with it. Yeah.
Rachel, same question to you.
Yeah, definitely agree with what George and Carlos have already alluded to. I suppose the difference there for me is that because I'm relatively new to the industry, those changes are already happening as I'm coming in, so you're not really having to adapt to them. That's sort of just the normal. Well, I suppose personally for me at the moment, the challenges around building equity and where do I go next, and I suppose there's sort of uncertainty around the price of land and the return of investment on dairy farms. And as George sort of mentioned earlier, the traditional path to farm ownership is probably not as clear-cut as it perhaps has been in the past. And I think the end goals of myself and some of my peers aren't necessarily centred around farm ownership anymore. I mean, personally, I know what my end goals are and what they will look like, but sort of unsure at the moment of the exact path that I will follow to get there. And that's, kind of around wanting to be open to be whatever opportunities arise, and my future plans kind of take into consideration the different ways of achieving those goals.
Sam, the situation and where you think you'll head?
Yeah, I suppose in my situation, I'm milking 240 cows, sort of largely by myself. My partner works off farm full time, so she sort of helps out where she can. And my old man's a retired sheep farmer who's discovered that he loves dairy farming, just can't get him to milk cows, unfortunately. But so for me, probably quite a big challenge is I don't have a full-time staff member, so particularly in spring, as a young person, you've got all your life savings and your total focus and energy and everything you think about is the farm that you're running. And you're working quite long hours, can be quite a stressful job at times with a lot of decisions to make. So I guess there's a bigger awareness of it now, and there's a shift towards people talking about mental health and those sort of things a lot more, which I think is great. Because when you're in the middle of spring, middle of calving, and you see the animal rights activists have come out with some new directive aimed at us about how we're not looking after our animals, and you've just spent 15 hours a day making sure that all your animals are well looked after, it can be quite disheartening. So I think for me, the big thing is just to always look at the areas of improvement on farm that we can be doing. What are those small steps that we know every day we're making improvement, and we're doing our bit, essentially, making sure that we know in our own minds we're doing that. And also, just something else to think about is, or the way I think about it is that a lot of the time I think the silent majority still have a lot of respect for farmers and what we do and how hard we work. So as an example, I was at a wedding in Australia recently, and during the small talk, you get talking with people about what you do for a living, kind of thing. And when you say you're a dairy farmer, these are city people around my age, and they say, "Oh, awesome! Well done. congratulations kind of thing. Like, that's a really tough job. I could never do that. Like, keep up the good work. We really respect what you're doing. And I'd like to think that people in New Zealand would say the same thing. Hopefully they would. But I think in the media, we don't see those kinds of stories. We only hear from the vocal minority, if you like. So I guess always remembering that the majority still definitely respect what we do, but they just don't necessarily get portrayed as such. I suppose to meet that challenge as well, I'd quite like to get involved in a lot of what DairyNZ's doing around educating school children and younger people about the opportunities in the industry and what it is really like, rather than letting them get to adults and then their political kind of leanings get in the way and they believe what an activist says or whatever. So I think the work that the sector's doing in that area is really important, trying to get our story across to younger people. And as another thing, I suppose, just making sure that as farmers we all take time out and get off farm and make sure we have hobbies, because you've got to think about something else every now and then.
You do, and we'll flick it back going the other way, Sam, so keep the microphone there. From your perspective, where do you see the big opportunities in dairy farming in New Zealand?
Yeah, we've heard a lot about change today, and I think that is a big opportunity for us in terms of, and George has sort of already alluded to this as well, is that I'm going to throw a few stereotypes around here, so please don't be offended, but I think I saw some statistics a little while ago about farm owners, the average age of farm owners getting older. And for me, there's two things here. So there's the succession strategies of our farms going forward, and the young people coming in, a lot of the time may have a bit more time and energy for some of the things that the older generation of farm owners may not have quite the same time and energy for, whether that's compliance issues and paperwork, etc. You always hear about people moaning about paperwork. And so I think there's opportunities there for the younger generation to kind of step up and take on a lot more responsibility in those sort of areas. And I see that, and George said about equity partnerships, I still see 50-50 share milking as a really good vehicle for younger people, and it would be great to see a lot more farms go down that avenue, particularly smaller farms. I mean, in the Manawatu this year, just the sheer number of smaller farms on the market was astonishing. So rather than the older generation of farms going, stuff it, I've had enough, I'm getting out, I think there's a real opportunity there to bring younger people in, not just through either, we don't want to see that just sell the farm, chuck it in, get away, because you're losing a lot of knowledge there amongst that older generation of farmers. There's a huge amount of knowledge that they need to share with the younger generation. But the other option of just chucking a manager on might not be the best one either. When you're share milking, you've got a lot more investment in the business, and when you're working for your own business rather than for a wage, it's quite a different take on things. So I think that's a huge opportunity there, is just how we bring the next generation through into running the businesses. Yeah.
Pass your mic to Rachel. As a farm manager, your thoughts and opportunities.
I suppose we're sort of talking on a bigger scale for the industry as a whole. It's sort of running the risk of repeating a bit of what's already been said this morning, but obviously we've got a growing world population and there's changing demographics, and that will ultimately lead to an increased demand for protein and dairy products. But because New Zealand is a low producer of dairy on a world scale, a small percentage increase in the production of some of these bigger nations can sort of outdo us. So we've got competition coming from that respect, and I think we're now seeing this new form of competition from alternative proteins and alternative sort of dairy products. So I think the challenge for us as an industry is to separate ourselves and ensure that we do have a sustainable place in the market, that we're targeting that niche high value product area that we've sort of heard about this morning. We need to be highly sustainable. We need to have consumer friendly practices that will give us a marketable story. And if we can market that high value product to give us a return that we're putting into all these environmental standards, the labour management, the animal welfare, and we're also unique in that we can promote ourselves as farming naturally or farming free range, however we want to describe it. We've got the ability to graze cows outside all year round on these pasture first systems, but without receiving a premium for these products. You know, the investment that we're putting into animal welfare, environment, labour, will just be seen as unjustified costs. So I think to achieve this, we probably will need a change in thinking from the traditional ways of farming, I suppose, as Sam's kind of alluded to. And I think that we need to market New Zealand products with a unified approach under a New Zealand brand, which is, perhaps something that as an industry as a whole, we'd need to think of a strategy of how we'd do that.
Carlos, biggest opportunities you see in dairying in New Zealand?
Look, the world population is growing. People are not going to stop consuming dairy. That in itself is an opportunity. I know we talk about earlier on about selling the high product. People will buy dairy. You know, they're not going to stop. Some people might prefer this or that, but people consume dairy. When it comes to job opportunities, I firmly believe on 50-50 share milking, just like Sam said. A farmer once told me that, you know, if you're a good operator, you'll never have a problem getting a job. And you know, all you got to do is just get the basics right, learn as much you can while you can, and when those opportunities come, they will come at the right time. And you know, like Rachel said, and Sam, you know, our farmers are getting older. You know, the farming, as we know, is a physically demanding job. So someone has to do those hard jobs, and the old fellas, no offense, you know, someone has to do those jobs that we know that needs a bit of a physical input, and that's what us young people come in. And so, you know, opportunities are out there. If you're good, it's endless opportunity there.
George, have you taken that advice?
Yeah, I have taken that advice, and I haven't taken offence, because it's the reality of the world I live in. Hey, look, I actually don't. I think the opportunities for dairy have never, ever been brighter, and I want to cascade this down from above. And the way we tend to look at things is what is the big picture? And the big picture is that the world population is getting both wealthier and growing, and there is a desire to actually even out, if you like, the disparity in income. So the demand for food, certainly for the next 20 years, is going to actually increase massively. Now, some of that will be in synthetic foods, some of that will be in other than dairy, but the demand of food has never been greater. And then you actually look at the story that people are expecting around food, and we've heard all the pressures that have come at us from the animal rights people about environment, about gases, and all those sorts of things. And then you look at where is New Zealand placed to do that. We're still probably, with the exception of Ireland and maybe parts of the States and maybe part of other things, still the best grass growing place, and we have the best technologies around turning that grass actually into milk and putting a story around that. And you actually look at the fact that all you people here today and the stories that you're actually sharing and the learnings that you actually take, and the only regret that I have is there should be 1,600 of you actually here listening to this and actually embracing what the opportunities are. Now, the next part of that is, and we've heard from Sam and Rachel and Carlos, is they are actually eager to be part of this story, probably more eager than what my generation is. My generation, understand, we came up from a model that basically did you worked hard, produced more milk, somebody will sell it on your behalf, end of story, and that was a simple model, just work hard, produce more milk. It was based around capital, if you like, and if you've got lots of capital, you could buy more farms and do more things. Now we actually have a generation that's actually saying, well, this is actually not so much about capital, it's about smarts, it's about how we actually behave on farms. And I'm quite sure that these people and the young people that they represent actually understand that far better than me and understand those behaviours and will live and breathe them far more than what my generation did. So that is the opportunity, and so it's on me, and I'm listening to their stories. How do we actually exit in the next 10 years, if you like, if we so desire, our farms and bring them in so they have a lifestyle and all that?
Now, our panellists up here haven't seen this question. It's an RLO question, so beware. It doesn't matter what sector you're involved with in agriculture in New Zealand, but nutrient management is here to stay, I believe. Overseer, as Damien O'Connor told us, has been in here in excess of a decade. Some call it a license to farm. Others say it's an advert for your business and sell your produce. How do you see it, George?
Look, I see it as an advert to sell our business. I've used Overseer since its inception. It's right back to 3.41. And so looked at our farm, warts and all, and constantly, Sharon and I have had discussions about, how can we actually do it smarter? I'm not saying that we're actually perfect, but it's been forefront in the mind. And that in itself, when we have people from urban environments or even the regulator that comes in, that actually creates a whole discussion. So one of the good things that's come out of that, because we've got that data, we've actually got nitrogen data for all our groundwater for about 15 years. So we know what the trends are there, warts and all around that. We've now got probes put on by the regional council that we can actually start to understand that, because there are gaps in our knowledge and we've got to close those gaps, because by closing the gaps, we will find the solutions and make that cake better for all. So I see it as a good news story.
Carlos?
Oh, I think if we want to sell our product and get that little premium there, we gotta farm sustainably, and we can't farm it the way we did 20, 30 years ago. And if that's the way where the dairying is going, then we gotta, like I said, we gotta adapt to that changes, and we gotta make sure that we give that opportunity to our future generations. And if that's the way to go, it's gonna be here, and if it's here to stay. So you just gotta work around it and work and farm that way. Yeah.
Rachel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a way to add value. It's just whether we can actually capture that value at the sort of as an end product. We need to capture that value from the consumer.
Sam?
I agree as well. I think it's something we have to do for the consumers. So we've heard a lot today about trends and going into the future. What are the sort of the trends that are going to affect consumer behaviour? And so the big one that I think is going to be important is that consumers want to know where their food comes from and how it's produced. And so in the areas of nutrient management, that's a big thing for environmental sustainability. So anything that we can do to sort of prove that we're doing the right thing, and to make sure that our consumers know that we're doing the right thing, has got to be good for us in the long run, I think.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes for questions from the floor and also a statement from George. But before we go there, Sing the Blues beat the Waratahs in the weekend, George. A simple question. 38-0. Who's going to lose to an Australia team first? And don't say the netballers. We're talking Super Rugby here, George. Quickly.
Chiefs.
You can leave at any stage before the crowd gets you. Carlos?
Probably Highlanders.
No one from the south. Yeah, clever man. Rachel?
Oh, it's still going to be the Blues, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd go with you there. How many dairy farmers in Auckland? Who cares? Move on.
Yeah, I'll have to go the Blues as well.
Blues have it. Any questions from the floor for our panellists up here? I'll take that down and share. If we can get you to state who your question is to.
To my Tokoroa colleague over here. You made the comment about the wool industry and no structuring. Perhaps I don't have much knowledge in that background, but synthetic was the main precursor to the coarse wool, and we're all well aware what happened with Icebreaker. International people bought it out. Are you totally convinced that that couldn't happen with our industry in dairying?
No, I'm not totally convinced that it can't happen with our industry in dairying. Far from it. And I am an industry structure man. And I'll take it one step further. And this is where I think as farmers, we've actually got to start looking, wider and internationally. And if you actually look at England and you look at these countries that have dairying that haven't got strong co-ops, and you look at what's happened to those farmers there, both in terms of the space that we're talking about today, both in terms of their profitability and that they're on the back foot. And I just come from Western Australia, spoke over there, and you just look what's happened to the dairying over there. There were some farmers that kicked up because they weren't happy with the prices from the PLCs. Tanker don't come, don't get collected, out of business, end of story. So, you know, we need to always think about that around there. I was going to make some other statement in a moment.
The wool thing about icebreakers not too bad. Our contracts just jumped up, seeing I supply them, has jumped up from $16.50 to $20.20 next year. So bring it on, I think. So good news story. A question right down the back.
Yeah, Steve Hines, Mangakino. Really neat to be part of an industry that all of you have spoken about is supportive with advice, mentorship, etc., etc. I want to pick up on George's point that we're growing in the face of needing to shrink, which could potentially lead to limited resources, etc., etc. I'm interested for your different ages and stages, what risk, if any, you see of the industry culture changing, and what must happen to continue to have as an industry the neat things that have supported you all on your journey.
Sam, you better answer that. So you're closest. We'll get it to one of Sam, you answer it, and then maybe Carlos or Rachel, paper, rock, scissors, to see who's got an opinion if Sam doesn't cover it all.
There's no chance of that. I suppose, I suppose a lot of that comes down to industry leadership as well. And I think, at the moment, the industry leaders are certainly aware of all of these issues. And as farmers, we've sort of, I guess, in a way, we rely on them to do our bidding in some of these areas because we're on farm, obviously, 24/7, so we don't sort of have the time. So for us, it's about relying on their input and their advice and their expertise in that area, while also at the same time providing some of our own knowledge. And I guess it's about making sure that on that theme, the industry stays connected, making sure that the industry leaders who aren't necessarily working on farm full time remain really connected to those who are, in a two-way kind of communication, and making sure that everyone's needs are being met, I suppose, and that information is being shared that way. I suppose, if that helps answer that.
Anything to add?
I think maybe making sure that we're continuing to develop new leaders and that the industry is well represented with a range of different people and I suppose a range of ideas and backgrounds.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask George, when you say growth shrink, is it you're talking about cow numbers or?
What I'm talking about is basically how do we actually grow our wealth and shrink the impact in the way we actually create that wealth. So, we've thought historically in terms of cow numbers, we thought historically in terms of milk solids, but the question actually being put for us now is in terms of actually dollars and how can we actually generate those dollars for New Zealand Inc. and Dairy Inc. at an actual lesser footprint. And to do that, we've got to do it at an individual level as well as a collective level. And probably to answer Steve's question, the key that we actually do that, one is we must always have fundamentally as our values is respect other people and other people's opinions. But most in all, we've just got to keep the dialogue between the different viewpoints, whether they're within the industry or outside the industry, and try to develop that understanding of both the challenges and the opportunities that face. So, as somebody said, the speaker said this morning, operating in silos really is not an option if we want to optimise the outcomes for New Zealand Inc.
Okay, I think we've got a chance for one more question. Any out there? Or one straight down the back, sorry.
Yeah, Tony Dowman from Pamu Farms. Question for the panel. What's your elevator pitch for the industry, and what would be one thing that you would change to attract and retain the best talent at farm level?
Well, I think, you know, in terms of attracting staffs and people to work in the farm, I think we ourselves on the farm, you know, we gotta change the way what we do back in the days where, you know, you work long hours and the harder you work, the better you get. But that's not the case anymore. You know, we try to the saying work smarter and not harder. We certainly doing that on our farm. And you know, if you don't need to work extra 2 hours, we're not gonna work for that. And the reality is, you know, go back 50 years ago, there's a lot of pressure nowadays for people, and people, you know, there's so much happening nowadays. Even sports for the kids is a bit of a mission to attend to. And you know, if you want the younger people to be working on the farm, you know, we can't be working 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day. And certainly we can achieve that on the farm with the same output. So you know, it's got to start from the ground level, and the new people that are coming into the industry needs to realize that what we've gone through, and you know, firsthand used to work 14 hours a day. That's not going to work anymore, and you know, we need to look after the new set of people working on the farm. And if we are to succeed in that, we gotta walk the walk, I guess.
Anything to add from Rachel?
Yeah, I guess just following on from Carlos, sort of, reasonably new to the industry, but I kind of hear from people that are a bit further along their journey than I am, that say, oh, you know, well, we used to do it this way, and we used to work this hard, and we go from managing to contract to lower order to 50-50, and that's not only not the case all the time now, but there's people that want to work on a farm and are quite happy to just do that and don't have those same goals as perhaps I do or Sam does, but they're quite happy to get to management and do that for a few years, and then there might be a career change. There's a lot of sort of career changes now that will have 3 or 4 different jobs within their working lifetime. So, you know, farmers traditionally will go, well, we're not, why do we need to make it like a town job? Because it's not a town job. But the reality is, for some people, it needs to compare to that, or they're just not going to come into the industry. We're not going to attract those people to actually work on farm.
Just something to add on that, I suppose. For me, or on the elevator pitch thing, I suppose use a bit of technology and take some pictures of what you do day to day. Take some pictures of some animals and some machinery that you operate, crops that you grow, etc. Show them the pictures; they'll come straight work for you. But for me, it's about attracting and retaining staff is about understanding what people's drivers are, like the others are saying. So for a young person that wants to go share milking, who wants to get to farm ownership by the time they're X years old, they're prepared to work extremely hard to do that. So know that, and that's what they want to achieve. On the other hand, other people, like Rachel saying, see dairying as a career, perhaps for a short time, perhaps for a very long time, but they might want to be a manager of a dairy farm, but they don't want to own a dairy farm, and that's fine. That's their goal, and it's about catering to those different people and what their different goals and objectives are. That's really important, I think. And in terms of attracting staff, I think I'll come back again, I suppose, to a DairyNZ program just around working in schools to educate particularly secondary school students around what the opportunities actually are in agriculture. When I changed careers and went farming, there's still a lot of my friends. I went to Palmy Boys High, so a city school, but with a lot of farmers at it. But there's still a lot of my friends who say, why are you going farming type thing? They couldn't understand it. And it's not till you sit down and explain to them what you do on a day-to-day basis that they actually go, oh, wow, that's actually incredible. So it's about making sure that the school leavers know about the opportunities that there are and the range of different careers that exist in the industry, and the amount of knowledge that you've got to have, that you've got to be extremely bright to do well in it.
I think just quickly, just building on what the previous speakers have said, I agree with everything there. Basically, at a higher level, what I think we actually need to do is be able to adapt, obviously, position descriptions to the goals of the young people. But I think there's a real opportunity that we could come together as an industry and start actually developing a register of the type of positions that people are offering or are likely to offer. And then on the other side of that, you could actually potentially have people that are wanting to come in, and those who may just be wanting to do it for salary or lifestyle. Then there may be those that are actually who want to make it a whole career and actually get to farm ownership. And it's about matching that up and about matching those position descriptions to the goals of the people so they can actually meet their needs.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you have to attract them, and there's a group or a family called the Peterson Brothers over in the US. They do a bit of, they put a rap music to about what they do on farm. Within a couple of weeks, they had 5 million odd hits, and we should see if DairyNZ can pull it up and have a look at some stage. It's hilarious. It's about telling the story, and they put it out there to tell their mates of exactly what happened on farm, and it was a great success. Hey, put hands together for our panel up here. Thank you very much.